probably agree on.
Yeah, the playoff team for sure.
So do you.
I mean, I tell you what, I don't think there was a more accurate state. And
if they struggle again, I mean, I don't think there's any way you can keep Alex Critch. But
what's up, y'all? I'm Bud Elliott. That's Jordan Hill of Dogs 247. Yes, today is Georgia Day on Cover 3 Summer School. Jordan, welcome back to the show, man.
Hey, thanks for having me back, Bud.
Absolutely. So another fine year for Georgia last year. I mean, narrowly missing the playoffs, but still an elite level team. I think there's a lot of people that think they really would have made some noise in the playoff had they been able to get in. Certainly saw that in the Orange Bowl. As a Noel, I wish could have had a little bit better game there with 0 of the 10 draft picks ended up playing, but still a lot of the depth of talent on display. I'll hit you with this first. What's kind of the mood of Georgia's fan base right now?
I think there's excitement. I think that you can't deny that they were disappointed with how last year ended. I mean, especially losing to Alabama. I think missing the playoff was one thing, but to have been stopped from making the playoff by Alabama and Nick Saban kind of added to the sting. But I think there's a lot of excitement because they know that this is a very talented team. Now, they've got big holes to fill. I mean, you lose Brock Bowers, Ladd McConkey, Kamari Lassiter, amongst several other guys. You know, they need guys to step up. But I think when you look at the shape that this roster is in, the fact you get Carson Beck back, the fact that you've got some proven guys on both sides of the ball also coming back, and the fact that, hey, we're talking about a 12-team playoff now. If Georgia were to drop one of these games in what I think is a pretty difficult schedule, they're still probably making the playoffs. So I think there's a lot of excitement. I think that it helps that Georgia's got some interesting games early, starting with Clemson in week 1. I think there's a lot of excitement. And I think a lot of fans are just ready for the season to get here and see what this team's able to do.
Absolutely. So where in your estimation is this team like clearly better than last year? Are there any position groups you're like, oh, this is better than what they had in 23?
I think the one that immediately jumps out is wide receiver, and I think they did a very good job in going in the portal to get additional help. They added 3 receivers, probably none bigger, both literally and figuratively, than Colby Young from Miami. He really impressed in his first spring. I think he's going to be a big red zone guy for this offense and for Carson Beck. But it's one of those things where they would have been in okay shape even if they didn't add those guys. They got Dylan Bell back. I thought he really broke out toward the end of last season. Dominic Lovett, who they got from Missouri before last season, I think he's got a really good chance to be their leading receiver in 2024. So, yeah, I mean, it's sort of, good on good. I mean, adding additional talent, I think you're going to see a ton of rotation at receiver, but that's the position that definitely stands out to me. And I'll also mention running back. They were really dependent on Kendall Milton and Dajon Edwards last year. Those guys battled injury a little bit early in the season. Those guys are gone, but they've got Trevor Etienne from Florida. Roderick Robinson had a great second spring at Georgia, and they've added 3 freshmen. So they've got a lot of options, and I think we're going to see a lot of those guys really get involved and really share carries by the time we get into the season.
Talking to Jordan Hill here of Dogs 247. Jordan, you mentioned the loss of Brock Bowers, the loss of Ladd McConkey, obviously 2 really, really elite level players. You saw in that SEC title game when McConkey just wasn't 100%, didn't look like he had the same giddy up there. So Colby Young on the outside. I assume Lovett's still a decent bit of slot work. Robert Thomas also slot, kind of. Bell more of an outside guy. I think, are they going to run more like 3 and 4 wide stuff with Beck returning and this kind of embarrassment of riches at receiver?
Yeah, it's going to be something to watch and seeing, probably Rara is also outside and Dylan Bell as well. And that's one of those things where I think we will see a healthy rotation. But, a big question mark for this team is tight end. And those guys are going to have to fight for, having those 2 tight end sets that we saw so much the last few years. But they've got Oscar Delp, who I thought showed strides in his sophomore season. They added Benjamin Urasek, who's really just getting here this summer. Former standout at Stanford. So he's kind of my big question mark is, does he come in and immediately battle Oscar Delp for the top tight end spot? But also got Lawson Lucky, added 2 freshman tight ends. And I think it's something that Kirby Smart really likes to have. And I can think about, a couple years ago when they had a ridiculously deep tight end room. And Kyrus Jackson, one of the receivers, told us during fall camp, it's like, look, I'm not only fighting for reps against the other receivers, I'm fighting to keep those tight ends off the field. Let's try to just have one tight end on the field and get some more receivers out there. So yeah, I mean, I think we're going to still see a good bit of two tight end sets. I think they're high on Oscar Delp, and I think Oscar deserves a lot of credit. He gets thrust into the lineup when Brock Bowers gets hurt in mid-October, and it wasn't perfect, but you saw that he was up for the challenge. He's a really good blocker, but having Benjamin Urasek, I think we will see a lot of three receiver sets, but those tight ends, they're still very, very deep at the position. Georgia knows it's effective when it uses those tight ends. I think we'll still see them quite a bit this fall.
So Georgia on the offensive line, they lose Amarius Mims, a guy who at times played really, really well for Georgia, although maybe his best ball will be played in the NFL, given the inability to stay healthy at times. And they lose a guy who you correctly nailed last year on this Summer School episode. Like Cedric Van Pran was a huge keep to not go into that draft in 23 and come back for 24. Should I be concerned about this offensive line? Because I watched the spring game, I was like, damn, Georgia's D line looked pretty good. But then again, I read some of the scrimmage intel and some of the insider notes on Dogs 247, and it seemed like, I don't know, through the first 2 weeks of spring practice, the offensive line was holding their own. So I don't know, what do we believe? Because week 3 seemed to go to the defense.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it always helps us with summer content when you have that back and forth. So we're just going to spend the summer trying to figure out who's good and who's not. But no, I think this offensive line is really, really good. They lose Cedric Van Pram, but they're bringing up Jared Wilson, who was a guy before fall camp last year. They knew he wasn't going to start because Ced was still there, but it was like, hey, we think we got something in this center. And Kirby Smart, he's not somebody that's going to just praise guys just to praise guys. He was out here saying he was outrunning some of the DBs, that Jared Wilson is that athletic. Now, he might have been stretching it just a little bit, probably getting those DBs to move a little bit better. But they feel good about Jared Wilson. They bring back Tate Ratledge at right guard. They bring back Xavier Truss, who's a guy that's kind of played all over for Georgia. And then Ernest Green, who I thought had a great first season as a starter. The question's sort of been more at left guard, but it looks like Dylan Fairchild, who played quite a bit last season, is probably going to play there. But they're in a situation again where they're going to rotate a bunch of guys. They feel good about Fairchild. Micah Morris is another guard that, truthfully, I always go out of these springs, especially in the offensive line these last few years, and I look at guys like Micah Morris and think, okay, this is a guy that might go to the portal. I mean, he can be a starter somewhere. Georgia deserves a lot of credit. They get these guys to buy in, even if they are not the first guys on the depth chart. Micah's going to play a lot this season. I think they feel really good about him. And just another guy to throw out there, I think Xavier Truss is going to be your starting right tackle, replacing Amarius Mims. But Monroe Freeling is a guy that really impressed as a true freshman last season. I don't know that he'll be starting once we get into late August, but I think he's got a very bright future on this offensive line.
Switching to the defense now. Well, actually, no, I can't switch to the defense yet. I need to ask you about Carson Beck. Should he be the highest rated quarterback in EA Sports college football?
That's a great question. I think he's got a good argument. I think that maybe the only argument you can make against him is maybe if you want someone who's a little more mobile. But I mean, Carson can move. He's got a good case for it, and it's going to be, we're going to get all kinds of content once these ratings come out. But I think he's got a good case for it. He's just a very accurate quarterback. Probably needs to work on the deep ball. I'll be interested to see what his arm strength is on this game. But he can move. I think he got more comfortable with that last season. I know one thing: if I am firing up the game and someone's playing as Georgia, I may be asking for a change or two. Or either that, or I'm just going to blitz Carson Beck a lot because I don't think it's going to end well for me.
Absolutely. All right, now we'll switch to the defense, which was still really damn good last year, but maybe not quite as good as it had been in 21 and 22. Is this defense in your mind, is it returning to that level, or are we just sort of wait and see mode? I mean, granted, wait and see is still probably elite, but where do you kind of place this defense in the pantheon of Kirby Smart defenses at Georgia?
I think that they know the bar is set super high, and I think it's one of those where they've got the pieces there, but we just need to see who steps up. And but we were talking about this before we started recording. To me, this starts on the interior defensive line. I mean, I thought that that was an issue last season. They haven't in the last couple of years had that Jalen Carter, had that Jordan Davis, and understanding those guys don't grow on trees. You don't just snap your fingers and they show up, but they tried to sort of get through it with kind of quantity versus quality. These are still really good defensive linemen, but they tried to rely on some of those younger guys to step up, and some of those guys had their moments. I thought Nazir Stackhouse had a really good 23, but they just need more of it, and they got a lot of guys that played throughout last season that they're counting on, and I think they did a very good job of keeping a guy like Christian Miller, who thought about going in the portal, puts it out there, that he's going to enter, and the next day he's like, all right, I'm going to stay put. And I think it's in his best interest, but I think they need guys like him, like Warren Brinson, a guy who played a good bit last year. Nas is sort of that guy that you can count on that interior, but he needs other guys around him. Jordan Hall, another guy that people were excited about as a freshman last season. They need to step up. And then really, other than that, as far as the defense, I really want to see what these cornerbacks are able to do. It was sort of hit and miss with Dalen Everett last season. He had a tough go of it against Alabama in that SEC title game, but he's got another year. He's one of those guys that I think fans rag on a little bit more than he deserves, and it's one of those situations too with Georgia. Having Kirby Smart, having Will Muschamp, and now having T-Rob back there helping coach the defensive backs. You should feel good about their evaluations. They're not going to put somebody out there that isn't up for the challenge. But Dalen's still been running with the first team, and I think that shows you how excited they are and that they feel he's got an ability to get even better. But the question now is Kamari Laster is off to the NFL. He was a second-round pick. They need someone to step up in that role. It looks like Julian Humphrey, who's a guy that played quite a bit last season and wound up getting hurt in the Ole Miss game. But they've got other guys. Daniel Harris, freshman Ellis Robinson has been trying to get in the mix too. They just need some of those corners, I think, to really assert themselves. And if they can get that interior defensive line play, I think they got a chance to have a really, really good defense once again.
We were talking to a couple guys at IMG at their pro day recently, and they're like, man, not saying that Ellis Robinson would have shut down Jeremiah Smith because that guy looks like a college junior, but he's probably the only corner in last year's class that could legitimately win some reps, like more than one, against the Jeremiah. And we never really got to see that. So yeah, I'm pretty excited about Ellis Robinson. That guy, like the testing numbers, freaky. Like the competitiveness is, at least as a high school recruit, we're really, really awesome. That's good to hear that he's doing well there. How much do you read into Georgia? And I use the term letting them walk here in sort of a kind of a loose way, because obviously it's not fully Georgia's decision, but like they do kind of dictate playing time and the collective and whatnot. But letting Jamon Demis Johnson go to Kentucky, letting Marvin Jones Jr. go to Florida State, right? Should we read into that those rooms are really loaded? Because it seems like the reports on both those guys are excellent so far, like at their new stops.
I think it just sort of shows you how Georgia's been really good at stacking that talent. And I think if you would sit Kirby Smart down and have, give him truth serum, he would say he would have loved to have kept both those guys. But, they're not necessarily hurting at either position with one, with both those guys gone. With Jamon, I mean, I thought he, was really playing his best football last year when he got hurt. And it's one of those things, obviously, he didn't want to get hurt, but it opened the door basically for his replacement. I mean, CJ Allen was a guy that we had heard a ton about. I mean, Kirby called out CJ Allen and gave him a compliment when he was, a December enrollee. They just won the national championship against TCU. And before Kirby gets up and leaves, he's like, we got to talk about the scout team and these guys that came in. And CJ Allen had been on campus for like 2 weeks and made that much of an impression. And then he played last year and did an outstanding job once Jamon got hurt. And then when Marvin Jones Jr., they have done a very good job in recent classes of really stacking outside linebacker. And this past class that they had signed that were freshmen in 23, I mean, Damon Wilson's a guy that people were super excited about. Samuel Mpemba has turned heads over the course of his time at Georgia. And then Gabe Harris is a guy that they've kind of had more playing at defensive end. But I think that they would have loved for Marvin to have stayed put. But Georgia's done such a good job that they're going to make the numbers count where they have as many players at every position. You want to keep those guys, especially a guy like Jamon, because he has the know-how and he's grinded through SEC seasons, which are super difficult, especially playing inside linebacker at Georgia. But the show will go on. Kirby knows that they still have talent at those positions, really, as well as the rest of the roster. And they're going to see what these other guys can do, stepping up and playing bigger roles this fall.
All right. Other than receiver, where is the position where you are most confident that Georgia doesn't really miss a beat or not much of one if they have to really dip into that depth a lot?
I would probably say that offensive line just because they've done a very good job. Again, like I said, you kind of, for me, when we get out of spring practice, I usually have a list. And it's not so much based on intel, but it's really more so the depth chart of anything. Like, okay, I'm watching to see if these guys leave. And Georgia did a very good job of keeping those guys, to stay put. I think, you look at some of the guys we talked about earlier. Xavier Truss is a guy that's played left guard. He's played left tackle. He's now, slated to be the right tackle, a fifth-year guy. I think that, you can count on him to step up and replace Mims. He's not going to be a big draft guy. That's a big reason why he came back to Georgia. But I think they've done a very good job, especially in a year where, Cedric Van Pran was a very reliable center. But probably more than anything, he was just a tremendous leader. And, this is an offensive line that it wasn't that long ago. They had one of their teammates, Devin Willock, killed in a car crash. And, said kind of kept that room together through a very, very traumatic time and a very awful experience. And they've got older guys now that, they're not Cedric Van Pran, but they can be counted on to lead that group, that they can be counted on to sort of lead the way. And I think they're just well positioned on that offensive line. And again, they've done a very good job these last few years of being deep enough that they'll rotate guys in. And I think they're set to do that again. It keeps guys fresh. And if Georgia's going to be playing as far into this season as we expect them to, they're going to need all those guys to try to grind through this season because it's going to be another long one.
All right. Couple quick ones here at the end. Is there a guy that you're like, Bud's an idiot? He should have asked me about this guy. Why has his name not come up yet? Who, looking back, we should have talked about?
I don't really think so. I mean, I think the biggest thing I'm very intrigued just to see what Trevor Etienne does this season. I think that running back group, they are so deep and they have a lot of different options, and especially the young guys coming in, that they are ready to roll with whoever, but Trevor's very clearly that number one running back. So to see what he does in this transition, to see how he fits in, and then obviously once we get to Jacksonville in late October, everybody's going to be seeing what he's able to do. So no, I think we covered most of the guys, and then we talked about earlier Colby Young. There probably was not a more talked about player for Georgia, especially among the newcomers, than Colby Young. And what that amounts to, I'm not sure. Georgia fans are still really, really wanting to see a 1,000-yard receiver. They haven't had one since Terrence Edwards. I don't think it's going to happen, but I think it's a good thing because they are so deep. They're going to, spread the ball around. And I expect Colby to be very busy and very active on this team, but don't know if we're going to see another 1,000-yard receiver.
Jordan, really appreciate the time here. If you could, tell our listeners at home, other than the expertise which you've just shown for the last 20 minutes, what makes Dog 247 different than everything else out there in the Georgia market, and why should folks come check you out?
Yeah, I mean, I think we do a very good job with our three-man team. Benjamin Wolk, hashtag stay woke, got to stay on with Ben, and Kip Adams, who's covered this team for a very long time. Just great expertise, great coverage, great intel from the recruiting ranks, from what's going on around the team, and also covering things like Georgia men's basketball, which is trying to get going with Mike White. But yeah, just, it's been awesome to see this team grow, especially since Ben came on last year. Really appreciate the job that all three of us are able to do. And I think the biggest thing, a lot of us have covered and followed college football for so long we're fans of it as well. And so I think we do a very good job of covering and writing things that as a fan, I would want to read. So I would hope that, all our subscribers over there at Dogs 24/7 would say the same. And I would hope that folks watching this who haven't already subscribed, go over there, give us a shot, and get ready for what looks like a very, very exciting 2024.
Appreciate it, buddy.
Of course.